I mean, they're excited to see friends again, social. Tomorrow morning, we're gonna read. Yeah, all things which we at least
It's a bird.
Ellen.
Yes, and that, it's right when they start, right? Start reading music.
I will.
And then when Aubrey stands up.
Good morning. Welcome to Table Community. A couple announcements before the worship team starts the whole worship team. This Tuesday we have a public speaking class brought to you by Aubrey. There is childcare. They should underline that and put it in all caps because that is a selling point. 6 p.m. here. Learn to speak publicly. It's not, he tells me it is not a ploy to get you to start preaching every Sunday. It is not a trick. It is, you can use it at other places too, all right? And then North Greenville's move-in day is this Friday, and we're gonna go help them from 10 to 12, and then they, a.m. to p.m. And then the church fair is Thursday. That's next Thursday? The following Thursday. The church fair is from 4 to 7 at North Greenville, right? All right, cool. Well, let's do that.
Go ahead and stand. Let's worship together. God, we thank you for today. Father, we thank you for the cross, God, and for your sacrifice, Lord. And we just ask today that, God, our worship would be pleasing to you. Father, would you help us to worship you in spirit and in truth? God, we lay our hearts down today. We open up to you. We just ask you to speak to us and to come meet us here. In Jesus' name, amen. Sing the atmosphere. The atmosphere is changing now. The Spirit of the Lord is here. The evidence is all around. That the Spirit of the Lord is here. The atmosphere is changing now. For the Spirit of the Lord is here. The evidence is all around. That the Spirit of the Lord is here. Overflow in this place. Fill our hearts with your love surrounds us. You're the reason we came to encounter your love surrounds The atmosphere is changing now. For the Spirit of the Lord is here. The evidence is all around. That the Spirit of the Lord is here. Overflowing Fill our hearts with your love. Your love surrounds us. You're the reason we came to encounter your love. Your love surrounds us. Sing, Spirit of God. Spirit of God, fall fresh on us. We need your presence. Your kingdom come, your will be done, here as in heaven. Spirit of God, fall fresh on us. We need your presence. Your kingdom come, your will be done, here as in heaven. Sing, Spirit. Spirit of God, fall fresh on us. We need your presence. Your kingdom come, your will be done, here as in heaven. Overflow in this place. Fill our hearts with your love. Your love surrounds us. You're the reason we came to encounter your love. Your love surrounds us. Father, we welcome you here today. Holy Spirit, we just ask you to speak to us through your word and through our worship. God, would you settle our hearts and open up our ears and our minds to what you have to say to us. Help us to be obedient to you. And we love you, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen. You guys can be seated.
Amen. Hey, thank you guys for leading us in worship. Thank you so much for that. Hey, if this is your first time at Table Community, and it is for some of you here today, I just want to let you know, make yourself at home. Bathrooms are in the back corners. There's coffee back there. Jamie made something, like baked something today. What is this?
It's
like
gingerbread whoopie pies.
gingerbread whoopie pie. So if like the message is too convicting and you need a break, just like go back there, grab yourself a whoopie pie, okay? So Alan is going to pass around some note-taking sheets for today. So today's sermon is a little different than normal. So today's sermon won't like tie up in a nice pretty bow. This is kind of the first part of some like an ongoing thing that we're going to talk about, not just today, but in the upcoming weeks and actually over the next few months. And so today ends with me wanting you to begin to notice something that's going on in our lives. And so today's sermon is also a little different because all the points and insights that you see, they are not originally my insights. This is something that was taught to me. It's probably been 7 or 8 years ago. As crazy as that seems. But by a pastor of mine named Pastor Paul Berthume. He's at a church in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And so he showed this stuff to me. And so if this is particularly convicting, I will give you his personal email address. And you can send all that stuff to him, right? These are his thoughts. Okay? But this is one of those messages that the first time I began to see this and see the reality of the thing that we're talking about today, I remember where I was sitting. I remember the chair I was sitting in, and I, the side of the room, and who was there with me, who was on the row with me. And I remember all these things because the thing that we're talking about today made me rethink a lot of what it means to follow Jesus, okay? It made me rethink all of his ethical teachings. It made me rethink what it meant for Jesus to go to the cross and to die and to be buried and be raised again. And the weight of that seemed so much heavier after I saw this for the first time. So typically, I like to open my sermons up a little more lighthearted, maybe tell a joke, tell a story, draw you in, and so I can get, you're open, and then you get a nice emotional response at the end. I always say, like, if I can make one person cry by the end of the sermon, then I've done my job right. Okay, this is not going to be one of those like nice, happy, uplifting sermons. In fact, this may like ruin your week. Okay, because I want you to see something that is deep, deep, deep within all of us, and a lot of us are maybe just not even aware. Okay. And so this thing that we're talking about today, it is dark, okay? It is, I would describe it as insidious, okay? It is deep, deep, deep within our hearts, and it is lurking within each and every one of us, and it is something that is underneath our culture, and it is there, and you're going to start to see it this week, okay? So one of the things that I say a lot around here is that Jesus teaches us to be good people from whom good things naturally flow. That's who God created us to be. And when we follow Jesus, we're able to follow him. That's that whole passage about the good tree produces good fruit. That's who we were designed to be. And when we follow Jesus, we become the good person who is like Jesus and does the things Jesus does. But this thing we are talking about today has the power to unravel any hope of that. Okay? This thing is hidden. It is dark. It is deep, deep, deep within us. And it is not going to come out easily. Okay? This thing, its bark is worse than its bite is worse than its bark. Okay? It really is. And most of us don't even have the words for this. And very few of us know how to look for it in our lives, okay? So that's what we're going to begin to do today. And so one of the things I love about Jesus is when Jesus comes to us, he chose to come to earth as a rabbi, which I think is beautiful because he's a teacher, but he's not just a teacher that says, hey, learn about me, learn the things that I say. He says, learn me, learn to be like me, learn to do the things that I do in the way that I do them as if I were living the life that you were given. And so he says, I want you to follow me, and I want you to apply these things at a heart level, okay? And so the challenge today when we read a text like this is, and I'm going to give you a list at the end, okay, of symptoms. You're going to want to look at that list of symptoms, and you're just going to say, okay, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. You're going to make it a list of rules, okay? This is a journey toward inner heart transformation, Okay? If you want to become a good person from whom good things naturally flow, you're going to have to push aside that temptation to make this a new set of rules. This, if you get control of this, it has the power to change the way you see everything. So today we're going to begin a journey. We're going to begin a journey. Okay? In fact, next week won't be much better, okay? In 2 weeks, when Molly speaks, we will begin to start the journey toward health. But today is, in fact, you know, we will come back to this teaching again and again throughout the course of the fall, okay? And so this is going to take months. This is going to take work. Because the thing that we're working on, you know, we're a trained together church, and as we work on this, okay, it is deep, and it's just going to take time, but because it's hidden deep within you, but this is the beginning to see that transformation is possible. And if you grab hold of this, when you begin to see this and you begin to work on this in your life, it is stunningly changing. The thing we're talking about today is actually the foundational issue in the Sermon on the Mount. Okay, which I would say for Christians in our walk is outside of understanding the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, this thing we're talking about today is foundational for everything that Jesus teaches. In the Sermon on the Mount, everything that Jesus teaches up to this point, it leads up to this point. He creates this. This is the thesis of the Sermon on the Mount. That's how rabbis work. They build up to their point, and then they kind of build off of it, okay? And so everything after this in the Sermon on the Mount comes back to this one issue. And this thing, guys, this thing that we're talking about today, if it roots itself in society, all that we can do as a government is just try to pass laws to kill so that we don't kill each other, okay? And right now, you're going to begin to see this in society and go, okay, the laws aren't even really keeping us from that right now. Because this is not an issue of rules. This is about what we're storing in our hearts. This is about what we're storing in our hearts. And so the crazy thing, when you research a passage like this, you go to a lot of commentaries, okay? And it's like one paragraph, okay? And all the paragraph is it says, this is the rule, okay? And then this is what Jesus says, and then these are the exceptions to the rule, okay? This thing loves the exceptions to the rule because then you're not dealing with it, okay? This thing, it is insidious, and it longs for you to make exceptions to Jesus' teachings. And the thing that Jesus is teaching about today is so much more profound than just identifying some external rules. So we're in Matthew chapter 5 today, okay? We'll begin in verse 21. That's on your sheet right here. You can follow along. If you don't have a pen and you need a pen, Alan will make sure you get one. Please get one. Please take notes. Because normally I'm not that pushy on it, but there's some things I want you to write down. I want you to look for this week. So the passage begins, you have heard it said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders is subject to judgment. Okay. It begins by saying, you have heard it said. You know why they said, Jesus said to them, you have heard it said? Because they had heard it said, okay? That's why, okay? So we begin with this first thing is you shall not murder, okay? Does that sound familiar? That's one of the 10 Commandments, okay? It's one of the 10 Commandments. So when Jesus is talking to his audience, they're going to be familiar with the 10 Commandments. He begins with, you should not murder. You know, you have heard it said, don't murder. And he continues, it says this 6 more times. You have heard it said, and then he'll say, but I say, okay? And so this is the beginning of the 6 times. Jesus is built up to this point. This is his thesis. This is where he's going. So we look at a law like this and we say, don't murder. Great? Everybody good with that? Right? Easy rule. Easy rule. Great rule. Haven't murdered anybody in weeks, right? Okay? We love these kind of rules because we look at these things and they're external. Most of us can't imagine ever murdering anybody, okay? We can't imagine it. So we like these kind of external rules, and that's the temptation. We look at that, we go, that's good. I'm never going to do that. right? If I just ended a day, I said, don't murder, go in peace, you'd be like, that was a great message. That was good, you know? I don't have to deal with anything there, okay? So we like those, and this is where commentators, they say, okay, don't murder, here are the exceptions, right? What about war? What about self-defense? Okay, if that's where your mind goes instantly, an adventure in missing the point of what is going on here. Okay, today, don't make this about external rules. Jesus is trying to show you something that we need to work on. We need to train together at a heart level so that we can begin to see transformation. And Jesus doesn't dismiss the law. Before this, he talks about the law. And he says, you should understand the heart of the law. You should write it in your own heart. You should know it there. And it's not because I want you to live up to these things, because if you become, this is who you are, you store these things in your heart, then you actually become the kind of person, because you're following me, that you don't need the law, because you'd never be the kind of person that would murder. You'd never be the kind of person that would steal. And so that's just who you are. That's transformation. That's what Jesus is getting at here. Okay? So verse 22, it says this, but I tell you, if anyone is angry with his brother or sister, will be subject to judgment. And the word judgment there, it says, some translations, they'll say, in the court of the Sanhedrin. You're good. The court of the Sanhedrin, so the highest court in the law, okay? All right, so they're saying, even if you get angry. So Jesus begins, he says, you've heard it said, but I tell you, okay? Those are the words that got Jesus killed right there. You heard it. The law says this, but I tell you this, because these were revolutionary words, because he's moving from external laws to internal things of the heart. And once you start changing your heart, once your heart starts to be transformed, that has the power to change everything. And people don't like that, because people change because there's a complete paradigm shift of what's going on. And so those are the things that got Jesus killed. So he says, he starts with don't murder, and then he goes to don't be angry. So he starts to move from the external, and he starts to move to the internal. Now, this here, he says, again, anyone who says to your brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court. Anybody caught anybody Raka this week? No. Okay, good. All right, so right, check it off. We can move on, okay? He says, anyone that says you fool will be in danger of the fire of hell. So, you fool, maybe some of you might have been condemned to the fire of hell like 3 times in traffic this week. But, we kind of look at that and we go, I can avoid that word, okay? This is the thing. Raka, the word raka is a word, it means empty-headed, okay? It means idiot. It means stupid. It means when that person cuts you off in traffic, what's the first cuss word that comes to your mind? The swear word, okay? With anger behind it, okay? That's what it means. It means not only are you stupid, but you're corrupt and you're evil and you are a waste of skin. You are a waste of breath. You're not deserving of my time and who I am. And I hold you in contempt. Raka, fool, is contempt. And that is the thing at the heart that we're going to begin to talk about today. And now the rule, you're going to want to make this into a rule. You're going to look at all the way contempt shows up in your life and you say, I'm going to try to make these rules so I don't hold people in contempt. Biggest mistake you can make. The biggest mistake you can make. When you focus on the externals here today, you will miss the point. You can have contempt for a person. You can have contempt for an idea, an ideology. You can have contempt for yourself. You can have contempt for me, the pastor, for preaching this to you today, okay? The irony, right? You can have contempt for God and what he teaches and Jesus' teachings. And what happens is when we hold people in contempt is it begins to diminish who we are. We begin to embrace anger, okay? A person that has contempt in their heart becomes unsafe to be in a relationship with, okay? A person that has contempt in their heart, oftentimes they will be isolated, they will be alienated because they put everybody else in a different box, in a different place, and they hold them in a certain place in their mind. And it is this thing that is seething within us, that when you think of that person, when you think of that group of people, okay, when you think of that political party or what have you, right, you think of them and all of a sudden there's this anger within you. A person that has contempt in their heart will run toward dysfunction. They will run toward dysfunction, and we will tell ourselves stories that make us feel more powerful and us in more control. This is the deal. When you have contempt in your heart, it actually makes you a great candidate for the fires of hell. This is what Jesus is saying here. And it's not because you didn't follow the rules and therefore you're a deserving candidate. No, it is because with this thing stored in your heart, you're no longer fit for the kingdom of God. Now, this is the good news. I've looked at our culture, and I've looked at our society, and I did some inner reflection and thought about all of you at our church. The good news, I found no contempt. Okay? I'm just kidding. Okay? All right. This week, all I'm going to do is ask you to look for it, to begin to notice this thing. Now, you're going to see it everywhere because I'm going to help you to see it. Now, this is the deal. Married couples, you're not allowed to point out contempt in your spouse, okay? You're going to see it. It's there, okay? They're going to see it in you. It's there, okay? You don't get to point it out this week. You can talk to each other and say, hey, I see this in culture, I see this in myself, I see this in our family, okay? You can talk to it. Groups, when we get into groups, okay, when it comes up, when we're talking about things, we need some example, we're going to use our stuff, use your stuff that's going on in your life, because it's really easy to look around and say, hey, you got that thing, the source of that thing is contempt, and it's easy to point it out. We get in groups, we're not going to do that to each other. Married people, don't do it, right? You're going to end up in counseling with Maria, okay? This is the deal. This week, I want you to have an unusual sense of awareness around this thing, contempt. And I know this word contempt it's not even in a lot of our vocabularies. We just don't use it this much. So I want to give you a definition. This is the definition that my pastor Paul gave me. It's this. It is a self-certain, write this down, self-certain, self-superior disdain. This self-certainty is a key quality of contempt. Okay? This self-superior, this I am above it, it is below me, this disdain, a key characteristic for anything that we consider beneath us and thus worthy of disrespect, scorn, and ridicule. Okay? You're going to begin to see this week. It's easy. It's everywhere. It's at the heart of everything. Okay? Now, I'm going to give you a little time to write this down, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you this Google's definition. You don't need to write it down. I'll show it to you in just a second. But Google's definition is this. Contempt is the feeling that a person or thing is beneath consideration, worthless, or deserving scorn. Now, the reason I like Google's definition is because it uses the word feeling. Your feelings are actually how you're going to find contempt in your own life. You're not going to think your way logically to contempt, because contempt shows up. Sometimes it's just this low grade, just boiling anger. It's deep, deep within there, and you got to kind of like, you see this thing and it makes you mad, and why does it make you mad? And you got to trace that thing back to the source of contempt. Okay, so that's Google's definition. The other thing I want to show you here is Wikipedia's definition. This is good. Wikipedia says contempt is a pattern. It is a pattern. Contempt is a pattern of attitudes and behaviors, often toward an individual, a group, sometimes toward an ideology, which has characteristics of disgust and anger. Now, some of you read that definition. You're already starting to see yourself in that definition. You're already starting to see the thing that you have contempt for in that definition, and you're like, they have contempt for me, and that, those people have contempt, and da-da-da-da. But really, start looking at yourself a little bit here. I want to help you see this. So I'm going to give you some observations. Now, there are 8 observations here. These are things my pastor Paul showed me about this. I want you to, this will help you look for contempt this week. The first observation about contempt is contempt often, the source of contempt is often pride. It's pride. Okay? There is something that I deserve that I did not get. Okay? There's something I deserve that I didn't get. I should be something. I should be somewhere. I deserve to make this much money, but I didn't get it, and that's not right. One of the sources of contempt you see a lot in America is education. Okay, and so we see ourselves as educated people, right? We're very educated, but I would say we know less. We know less of how to incorporate it, to integrate it into our life. And so as a result, we end up, as that definition, very self-certain, right? Very self-certain. The Bible says that knowledge can puff up, but love builds up. So yeah, there's times when you look at somebody and you don't look down on them because maybe they're in the wrong because they don't know or they don't understand. And so you stand above them and you look at them and say, well, they're just idiot, they're just stupid, they don't understand. And so you look down on them rather than saying, out of love, is I'm going to come alongside them and I'm going to build them up. Okay? So I've had the privilege of living in both the far north and the far south. This is the deal. Southerners, we hold Northerners in contempt. Northerners, we hold Southerners in contempt. It's just the way we roll. When we lived in the north, we lived there during the time that the big incident in Ferguson happened, and all these conversations about racism started to boil up. And the stereotype in the South is that Southerners are just racist, and they're just racist, and it's because they're stupid. Okay? And there's idiots, and they're empty-headed, and they don't understand, right? This is the deal. There is racism in the South. I've met us. We've got plenty of it in us. If you don't believe you have it in you, just hang out a little while. I'll show you. I'll convince yourself. You got some of that in you too, right? We need to work through it. But it doesn't come from a place of ignorance. It doesn't come from a place of stupidity. No, it comes from this thing of contempt. This is where it comes from, okay? And so that is a much darker thing than just ignorance, okay? And so we just, as an educated person, we look down on them, right? Because all that is a heart of pride. And in Southerners, we look at Northerners and we think of them, they're snobby, they're stuck up, they're arrogant, they're self-important. That's the stereotype we give Northerners, right? It's contempt. Both things come from a place of contempt. The source of contempt is often pride. Okay, the second thing is this. Disappointment and hurt often create contempt. Okay? Disappointment and hurt often create contempt. Because this is why we've convinced ourselves that we shouldn't hurt in life. Okay? That life should be easy for me. And so if we have money, we hold poor people in contempt. We look at them and we say, you know what? I picked myself up by my bootstraps and I was able to do it. Why can't they do it? Right? If you don't have money, you look at rich people and you say, everything was just given to them. They didn't earn it, they didn't work for it, they don't deserve it. They just hold the boot on the throat of poor people. That's who they are, that's what their intentions are. We just look at them with contempt. We look at people who are more gifted than us, you know? And we just go, man, they were just born with things that I wasn't born with. I hold them in contempt. We look at people who catch breaks, right? We look at our life and we're like, man, I've been doing all the same thing that person is, and all the only difference is they got a break, and so they're ahead of me, and that's not really fair. And so I look at them, I compare them, I hold them in contempt. I look at my family and what my family is going through and the struggles that we have, and then I look at that other family, and they seem to be perfect, they seem to have it all together. I hold them in contempt, right? We hold people in contempt who we think haven't suffered as much as we have. Okay? The third thing I want you to understand is this, is that the insecure often hide behind contempt. Think of your favorite politician that you love to hate. Doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on, right? Oftentimes we look at them, and the reason we don't like them is because they have contempt for us and what we believe, right? And we think they're insecure, and they hide behind contempt, right? Sometimes the people with the most contempt in their life are the people that seem the most certain. They seem self-certain. They seem like they've got it all figured out. And so they're the most critical people you know, right? And they're also the people that are afraid to really let anybody in. And they kind of just live by this eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. I'm going to hold you in contempt before you can hold me in contempt. That way I've already put you in a box and you can't do any good. So when you come at me, it doesn't matter. What you have to say doesn't hurt me, okay? So the insecure hide behind contempt. Fourth is this. Okay, every human evil finds its genesis in contempt. Okay, some of you don't like that, hear that, and so you're already holding what I just said in contempt. But every human evil finds its genesis in contempt. It really does. I want you to see this. I want you to notice it this week. Because ultimately, contempt Part of what it is a failure to recognize the full image of God in someone else. And so you see them as beneath you. Every sin you can think of can be seen through this lens of contempt. Okay? And so what happens to a marriage when contempt enters into a marriage? What happens to that relationship? What happens in a workplace when employees look at their boss with contempt as they can't do any right, and the boss looks at the employees, they can't get it together? What about schools? When students hold teachers in contempt? Teachers, you ever had any students hold you in contempt? Yep, doesn't take much, right? Okay, teachers, we hold students in contempt, okay? Churches, this happens in churches. You have different views that exist within our church, and somebody says this and they believe this thing, so I put them in a box and I put them over there, and there's only so much right that they can do. Okay, we even hold things like morality and purity in contempt. The things when we do this, everything starts to unravel. Look at countries. What happens when countries hold each other in contempt? Well, that's how we end up at war, right? What happens when races hold each other in contempt? Well, that's ultimately how things like San Antonio come to be, right? This is just contempt. It's just a heart that is filled with contempt. And it is a commitment to ideology and ideas and all these things, right? But that are just filled with contempt. And ultimately, that is the source of our anger, and that anger is eventually going to boil over. What happens when genders hold each other in contempt? When men look at women and they just look down on women and just they're not as capable and they can't do as much and that's just who they are, that's contempt, okay? And it goes the other way as well. Women look at men and they're just, we just manhandle things and that's just who we are. We're just big brutes and, we're stupid and we don't use our brains and all this kind of stuff. You can put people in contempt. And what happens is it divides us. It separates us, right? We become broken and walled up because we put each other in this box of contempt that you're not allowed to escape. Okay, the fifth thing I want you to see is this, is that contempt degrades that which is holy, meaningful, and respectful. Okay? Contempt degrades that which is holy, meaningful, respectful. Things that God said is sacred, contempt tries to degrade. Okay? So we as Christians, we hate when people do this to us, but we do this to others as well. We hold them in contempt. Okay? And so just think of things that we hold in contempt in society. One of the things that is pure and good is this thing of purity. We look at purity now as just, in our society, just kind of look down on it. It's like, that's immature. That's just, why would you do that? Why would you save yourself in that kind of way? We look at things as marriage and contempt. The Bible, Jesus sets marriage up as this sacred thing. It's this covenant relationship. It's this lifetime commitment. But we look at people and we say, why are you getting married so young, right? That's a waste of your life. What are you doing? Okay? And then divorce is a result of contempt for marriage. We just look at marriage and we just don't take it as serious as God sets it up and says that it is a sacred thing. And so, we just see casual divorce happening, and it's just like, well, we got married and we were together for 10 years and we're just different people than we were when we got married, right? All that is contempt for the commitment that you made. You know what? We've been married for 10 years and we've changed, but we've changed together, and we've changed together because we're committed to each other and we're not giving up on each other, right? It's something sacred, but so many times we look at those things with contempt. You kids ever have contempt for parents? Does that ever happen? Right? Or teachers? Right? We're disrespectful to teachers and parents when these are people that God has placed in our life. Parents, we can have contempt for our kids. Now, as parents, you can say tough things to your children as long as there's an environment where they know they're loved, where they know they're respected. And in fact, if love and respect is kind of the groundwork, that's what actually makes it possible for them to hear you when you say something like that. But if all they ever get is tough language, if all they ever get is disrespect and critique, well, then that's exactly what you're going to get back. Because contempt dehumanizes us. It reduces us. It makes it so that you can't have a relationship with that person, right? And when it takes root in your heart, what happens is you just begin to see that person in the worst possible light. They just can't do any good. Okay? It's hard to recover a relationship from there. Number 6 is just you need to understand that contempt spreads. It is deep and dark within us. And we think about so many times about the external things, like violence and murder and all those kind of things. And you look at something like San Antonio and like, oh, how's this violence spreading and all this kind of stuff? Well, it started so much deeper than that. It started at this place, Contempt. And before we ever get to a place where we're acting and there's violence and there's murder and those kind of things, it's already spread because this is something that is underneath us. It is deep, deep, deep. And we just live with this eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But this is the deal. When you read scripture like this, like last week we talked about violence, we talked about murder this week, we look at those things, we just make them external rules, and we don't ever deal with the contempt that is beneath the surface. This number 7 is very, very important, mostly because we're a church. And that is that religious contempt is especially dangerous. Religious contempt is one of the most dangerous forms of contempt. And the reason for that is simple. Contempt likes rules. Contempt loves those external rules because they don't touch us. Okay? Contempt loves religion. And religion that works by rules. And one of the things that will surprise you that contempt really loves, contempt loves truth, okay? It doesn't want the whole truth, but it loves truth. It is self-certain. So if I can find this one thing that I am right about, if you don't agree with me on this one thing that I'm right about, then nothing else you say can be heard, okay? That's contempt. And I will use this one thing that I'm right about. That no matter what else you say, nothing good can come from you. I'm going to use that one thing. I'm going to hold on to it tightly. And I'm just going to beat you up with that. And if you can't agree with me on that, then you are other. I'm putting you in the box. It's contempt. You can disagree. And the worst part about religious contempt, especially some of us who grew up kind of fundamentalists, right, is this. It's not only am I right, but God is on my side. Okay? And so now, nothing you say can be heard in a positive light. Okay, this goes without saying, I feel like, but contempt skews our perspective. Everything you say is heard in the worst possible fashion. You can hear contempt when people refer to somebody's name. The way that they say a name, or the way that they say a people group, the way that they refer to a political party or an idea. Okay, you can hear contempt there. And all this anger we feel ultimately, even whether it's blowing out the top or it's just this low-grade thing within us, this can be sourced back to the thing of contempt. And going back to religious contempt, a lot of us were like, well, what about righteous anger? See, oftentimes that's what contempt loves. It loves for you to have that righteous anger about that one thing. And it skews your perspective, and you justify all kinds of other anger and contempt because you think that you're right about this one thing. And you may be right about it. But it shouldn't be allowed you shouldn't use it to allow other people to have contempt for you. And it says that Jesus says when you have contempt, it makes you worthy of the fires of hell. And when he says that in the last word, the actual word there is Gehenna. And Gehenna is this image that Jesus uses. Gehenna was this valley outside of Jerusalem where Jesus was talking to these people. And in the valley of Gehenna, it was a garbage dump, okay? And there was just always things burning there. There was always fire going. There was always just kind of this stench going. In fact, historically, it was this place where kings in the past, they had taken their children, and in the ultimate form of contempt, they had sacrificed their children to pagan gods, right? And so Jesus uses this as a picture of judgment. He says, when you let this thing build up in your life is worth garbage then. Our families can become that way. Our church can become that way. Schools, politics are easy, right? Our culture is drowning into it. This week, I just want you to take measure. I want you to begin to see the music you listen to, the podcasts you listen to, the news we listen to. How much of all that stuff is just somebody, it's just us ganging up on one person and degrading one person and one thing and one idea. Think about the conversations you're going to have at school this week, at work this week. Look at the condition of your family. Okay? When you see on the news, when you see the violence and war in the world, when you see the racism, trace that back to contempt. We love to group up on people so that we can look down on them. But this is the deal. I want to give you just this shed of hope. Is that it is possible to conquer contempt in your life. It's deep. It's going to take work. But Jesus actually calls us to live a life that is above contempt. And this is the thing that I want to tell you that will puzzle you and will seem odd to you, is that when you begin to live a life above contempt, Jesus says you'll start to look childish. You'll start to look innocent. You'll start to look like the person that always sees the best in everybody. Okay, that's who you'll be. That's a sign of a transformed heart. But we're not going to fix it this week, okay? We're going to begin to notice it this week. I don't want you, don't even try to deal with it this week. You're going to take notes, and you're just going to go home and be like, all right, I got to get rid of contempt. Okay, I got to get rid of contempt. It's deeper than that. You're not going to fix it this week. It's going to take time. I just want you to start to notice it. This is a process. And I apologize now for your week that has probably been ruined already. Okay? These are some of the symptoms. Write these things down. Kel, when I get done with the symptoms, you guys can come up. Okay? These are just some symptoms, some things that when you see these, you can start to source them back. Now, the first one is sarcasm. Okay? The first one is sarcasm. I want you to tell you this: sarcasm is not a sin. Okay? Even Jesus uses sarcasm sometimes to make a point. Okay? But this is what happens so many times. It's not just sarcasm, it's what's behind it, okay? And so many times when we use sarcasm, we use it to degrade people. Somebody will be so happy about this thing, and it's this thing they were passionate about, and we just use this kind of witty, sharp turn of phrase just to come in and undercut it, right? It's contempt. The second thing there is ridicule, okay? Cynicism of sacred things. You know, what are the things that God has said are holy in our lives, in our world, and that are worth paying attention to? These are the things we ridicule. Look for these things this week. One of the characteristics is negativity. Okay, if you know somebody that only sees the wrong in everything, probably have a lot of contempt in their life. Okay, resentment. Where do you look at other people's lives and other things, and you just start to see? You start to compare yourself. You start to resent what they have that you don't have. The glorification of knowledge and experience. Okay? You don't understand. Your point of view is not valid because you haven't been where I've been. Okay? Well, love builds up. Love steps beside somebody and helps somebody see that point of view. Contempt looks at that person and says, you don't know. You haven't been there. You haven't studied what I've studied. You're just ignorant. You're just stupid. That's what it is. Disregard. Disregard is a tough one. Disregard is, I'm not mad at you. I'm not really happy for you. I just don't care. You're not worthy of a response from me. That's contempt. Bitterness. Bitterness, if you're a very bitter person, there's oftentimes contempt there. Disrespect. Disrespect is just this thing where we don't honor the image of God, who God created somebody to be, to recognize the full potential that God has placed in that person, so we disrespect them. It's contempt. Isolation. Isolation is oftentimes a sign of contempt because it's this thing where we wall up and we section people off in our lives, and so we become isolated. Arrogance, judgment, gossip. Gossip is such a big one. We just talk about people, right? You know that person, we just talk about them. We don't talk about them in a positive light. We're just saying negative things to say negative things. Contempt, that's what it is. Anger, rage, and then the last one I think is just so important to understand is certainty, okay? The people that are just so certain they're right, oftentimes they're the most contempt in their life. Now, again, I want to warn you, we're just noticing this week. I don't want you to go home and point out the contempt in anybody else's life, okay? Spouses, groups, okay? Some of you probably have contempt for me for preaching this right now. I understand. I forgive you. Don't make this into a list of rules. Don't make this into a list of rules where you just go home and just say, I'm not going to be bitter, I'm not going to be disrespectful, I'm not going to do those things. We're just noticing it this week. The source of that thing is contempt, right? And if you're doing that, if you're trying to make it about external rules, then you're already looking for a way around Jesus' teachings. And so many of us do this. We just say, Jesus said this thing that's impossible really to live by, so I'm just going to go do my own thing. You know, I'm going to follow Jesus, but in that one area, I'm just going to do my own thing, however that works out. And then I'll just, me and Jesus will deal with it when we get to heaven. You know what that is? That's contempt for the teachings of Jesus. Okay? So we want to avoid that if we can. This is the foundation of Jesus' exegetical teaching. When you begin to see this in your life, it has the power to change everything. And this is the deal. Jesus walked in a world that was full of contempt. yet he did not return contempt with contempt. I want us to rise above it. I want us to train together to be good people from whom good things naturally flow. And the temptation this week is just going to go home. I'm going to try harder, try harder, try harder. We're not try harder people. Okay? This is a train together moment where we begin to identify this thing that's going to take time. It's going to take time. We're going to begin to work through this today. And it just begins by noticing where contempt is in our life. Let's pray. Dear Jesus, we just ask that you help us to notice this week, to see the things that you came to earth to save us from. Our hearts have it in it. It's deep, God. As we walk with you, we want you to show us just what it is that is within us. And as we begin to see it this week, as we begin to notice it in the things that we watch and we read and the conversations we have in our families and our schools and our churches, that we'd have an even greater appreciation for what it means for you to come and die for us. That your forgiveness is not just for external rules, but it is for these deep, dark things that we hide in our hearts. Show us these things and make us aware and walk with us and lead us toward your goodness. Amen. Hey guys, there'll be communion in the back. I would encourage you to take communion today, and as you do, reflect on what we've spoken about.